Hey, this is Rex Robinette. I'm up at Frank's Great Outdoors, and this is going to be a first of its kind podcast for them. Joining me today is April Simmons of Michigan DNR. She's a fisheries biologist. Welcome.
Thank you.
So, April, tell us a little bit about you first, and then maybe a little bit about the team of people you work with.
Okay. Oh boy, I never know where to start when people say, "Tell me about yourself." So I started working for Michigan DNR in September 2021, so pretty fresh. Originally from Georgia, so I always ask people to extend me a little bit of grace as I work out my coverage area. I graduated with my master's in marine and environmental biology in December 2020, so right during all the COVID stuff, and went out on a limb, moved up to Michigan, and here we are, got married and got a dog and living my life, chasing fish.
Now, welcome to our great state. There's so many things to do here. I mean, just before we start this podcast, we're talking about deer hunting, duck hunting, upland game hunting, and of course, fishing. So fishing's right up your alley, not only from a hobby, but from a profession as well. Mm-hmm. So maybe I thought today we'd talk just a little bit about tagging and marking programs. Does that sound like a good topic?
Oh, yeah, I love it.
All right. So my understanding is that tagging and marking programs help us understand the movement of fish and maybe their growth rates. But is there more to it than just that?
I think that those are the big concepts of why we mark and tag fish, but I don't think people realize just how much we can tease out that information. So we're not looking at just that they're moving, but where are they moving to, where are they not moving to, and what time of year are they doing it, because that can tell us why they're in that habitat. We can see their habitat preferences by seeing what areas they avoid versus what areas they spend a lot of time in. And then when we look down to like hatchery fish, we have the coded wire tags and stuff. We can compare what our wild fish are doing compared to what our hatchery fish are doing. Is there different behaviors there, different mortality rates, survival rates? One of the other like big things that researchers will look at nowadays is their behavior. How are they responding to climate change? So when we have our tags that can read depth and temperature, then we can see, are they going into deeper water in the summer because it's cooler, and like how are they last year in the really sad winter we had, where were the fish hanging out versus hopefully this upcoming year when we actually have a real winter, are they still hanging out in the same area of the thermocline? And then obviously our growth and age data once the fish is harvested, and then we can see how big it is compared to when we put the tag in there, and we know the age now. We can compare that stuff. And then fishing pressure. A lot of bass tournaments now are starting to tag fish to see how often they're catching the same fish over and over. And what, like largemouth bass, for example, I don't know about so much in Michigan, but across the country there's been a lot of interest in largemouth bass and how they respond after they're being released in bass tournaments. And so they'll put tags and those fish to see how far they move away from where they're put back into the water. So a lot of different ways you can analyze that data.
Okay, so maybe we'll start locally and then spread out from there. So locally, when we think about the Saginaw Bay region and the river systems, how many walleye do you sample and catch and tag each year, each spring?
So we go on the Tittabawassee, and every spring, so usually starting about late April, we tag 3,000 fish. Some of those fish, they're not all from the Tittabawassee, I should say. We usually go to the Coquitlam River and do a subsample there, and then we just started rotating in a third river. So we've done it on the Flint, and I think we've done it on the Shiawassee. We'd like to do it on the Rifle, but you get up there and it can get really difficult to get in and out of those rivers because it gets so shallow that time of year. But we have the 3,000 that are tagged with the jaw tags, and then 300 of those are sampled for their age, and that's just with a fin clip, so they're not killed or anything like that. And then we have a telemetry project going on that I think we tagged 300, maybe 300 fish, give or take, over 2 years out in Saginaw Bay. So that one was just targeting them during the regular fisheries because we wanted to have a mixed bag of, and then see where those fish were going to spawn.
So for those not familiar with telemetry, could you explain a little bit about what that is?
Mm-hmm. So for the telemetry tag, it looks like, I forget that you can't see me, so my fingers are probably pointless, but it looks like a little battery that's usually in their belly. And depending on the size, we have V13 and V15s. Some are, or is it V19? I don't know. They're two different sizes, but some last longer than others, so you can always tell by the size of the battery. But in the bay, really all of Lake Huron, all of Lake Erie, pretty sure all of Lake Ontario, and then we have a couple in Lake Superior and Lake Michigan, especially in Green Bay. They have a bunch of receivers. They are basically computers rigged to the bottom of the lake. And so when a fish has that transmitter inside of their belly and they get within a certain proximity, because they're all set a little different, it'll ping off of one of those receivers, like little computers, and the data will be held in that receiver. And so we'll know by that identity, that unique number that is connected to their tag. They'll ping on there, and then every fall we usually dive or use a boat to get those receivers, hook them up to a computer, and we can download the data. And then once we lay that all out in our fancy computer systems, they do the graphics that people have seen where it's the little dots moving all over the bay or the lake. And so, yeah, it's just like having a little computer down there. I get asked a lot how far those things can read, and it kind of really depends on any obstacles that are in the way. Like if they're near a reef, the receiver on the other side of the reef is not going to pick up on their ping because the rocks are blocking that transmission. But each one of those tags is set to go off at a different sequence, like every 3 minutes or every 2 minutes or something like that, so that they're not constantly pinging on top of each other at the same time. Because if there's nothing in the way, then it can catch you for hundreds of feet away. So
I see. Interesting. So I'm pretty familiar with the metal jaw tags.
Mm-hmm.
A couple years ago, I got one with an orange cheek tag. So do we still use the cheek tags? And are there other tags other than just the telemetry and the jaw tag that we're using?
So we do not really use cheek tags anymore. I don't know of any ongoing project that has the cheek tags. You might get potentially a musky and maybe a walleye still that have those tags in them, but we just found that they get hung up, they rip out a lot easier, they get all kinds of like gunk in them, and so they're just not the favorable tag anymore. That's why we do a lot of the jaw tags. And we do have other tags. So we have anchor tags, which are also called spaghetti tags. They're the ones that look like little noodles, neon colored noodles that are typically coming out the belly of the fish. Sometimes they do them up by the dorsal. Typically, in my case, they're accompanied with a telemetry tag as well, so that you can tell by looking at the outside of the fish that it's tagged. But not all fish that have a anchor tag or spaghetti tag necessarily have that telemetry tag. But it's the same concept as a jaw tag. You catch it, you read the number off of it, and call it in and let us know how big it is. We have our PIT tags, so that's our passive integrated transmitter tags, PIT. Those are really popular in musky. All of our stocked muskies have a PIT tag in them. All of our stocked lake sturgeons have a PIT tag in them. So a lot of fish that come from hatchery have either PIT tag or coated wire tag in them. Not necessarily all of them, but a bunch of them do. The PIT tags are really interesting because you can read them on a fish and release it and get all the data that you need. but you have to have a pit tag reader, which you can actually just buy on Amazon for like $25. They say that the same tags you would get to read a microchip on a dog, you can use that to read a pit tag. So we have Michigan Musky Alliance. They supply a bunch of pit tags to people, and they'll go out to inland lakes and Great Lakes and stuff like that, and every muskie they catch, they scan for a pit tag. So that's pretty cool. And then Dakota wire tags, we rotate those with our different salmonid species, and those are the ones that I think is probably the second most familiar type of tag, where you catch a salmon that is missing, or a trout that's missing an adipose fin, and there's a good chance that it's got a coated wire tag in its snoot, and we have the program where you submit the heads, and we can read those tags.
I see. So if we go back to the one that most people are familiar with, which is the jaw tagging,
Mm-hmm.
is there a specific location you put them in the jaw, upper, lower, right, left? And if so, why is that?
So we usually put them in the upper jaw, and I guess the right hand side. And I don't really know that there's a preference to it, other than that's just the way they started doing it. And so they try to keep it consistent so that especially when we are out there netting a bunch of walleye, so that we're looking on the same side, so we know whether or not there's a tag there. Because we have double tagged fish before because it was tagged on a side that we're not used to seeing. But I'm pretty sure it's the right side. But of course, like now that I don't have one in my hand, it's like hard to say, because we grab them and turn them, and it's usually tagger's preference
Sure.
on how those end up in the fish. But it is the top jaw, not the bottom jaw.
And you'll often see people boating a fish, and you'll see a bunch of heads turned because everybody's always scanning. Is there any jewelry in
Yes.
the fish? Yeah.
Especially if you see one with an R on it. You can get your $100 if you turn it in.
Right. So other approaches that you might use other than the tagging, is there any type of other marking that you do?
Yes. So we'll do fin clips for our stocked fish. So, for example, one that I did recently with brown trout, we stock brown trout in the Rifle River, and we can dive into the nitty gritty of that later if we want to. But we have 5 different stocking locations on the Rifle. So this year, I gave each one a unique mark for the fish, because these stocking sites are not very far from each other, and those were established long before I came along. So it's possible that maybe the number of stocking sites can be reduced, so our hatchery guys are not driving all over the place, just drop 2,000 fish here, 2,000 fish there. So I gave each one of them a unique mark. So one's missing a right pec, another stocking site fish is missing the left pec, and then we have the right ventral and the left ventral. Once you run out of those fins, you can start seeing those double clips. I personally try to avoid the double clips. Not that it makes too much of a difference for the fish themselves. I just don't like to do it. Adipose clipping, that'll tell you right away if it's a stocked fish. We don't typically do those unless they're also coated wire tags, just to save the public some confusion. I don't really need people to give me a bunch of brown trout heads because it's got that adipose fin missing. But yeah, we'll do at the hatchery, sometimes right there on the water as the fish are getting dumped in, we'll clip off one of their fins so that we can see it. And then when we're doing our regular surveys, we always take aging samples. So that is depending on the species. So walleye, it's the dorsal. Northern pike is the dorsal. Bass, it's the anal fin. We'll clip that off. We use it to age the fish, but it also acts as a marking. So if we ever did a mark recap, we would know that that fish was caught before. So.
Okay. So you talk about tagging, walleyes locally up in different tributaries, but then you're also mentioning a lot of different bodies of water with a lot of different types of fish. Pick some place like, say, Lake St. Clair.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me a little bit about the different species that you might be tagging down there.
Oh, yeah. So Lake St. Clair has a ton. I have my list so that I don't miss anything. So they have, this is going to be our Mount Clemens crew, our research crew out there. They are tagging moon eye, which is a state endangered species, and that, like many of these you hear, it's going to be to figure out where they're going, what their distribution is. For moon eye, with it being an endangered species, seeing where these fish are moving will help them with their survey efforts, so they're targeting that preferred habitat so they can better assess the population. Smallmouth bass, that's a newer one. So that's also telemetry tagging. That one's kind of interesting. It looks like they might have two separate groups of smallmouth bass in Lake St. Clair that don't have a whole lot of overlap. So there's some interesting, maybe genetic things that could come out of that. So they're just exploring that right now to see if they are in fact separate groups. Northern pike, they also, I believe just this year, maybe started last year, started tagging northern pike, and that was to also assess where they're responding in the system and better understand their habitat use. Musky, a lot of places tag musky. They are using, well, that one's actually complete, but they did use that to look at their movement rate. So like I mentioned earlier, a lot of our muskies have the pit tags. In St. Clair, they actually put in the telemetry tags, and they had one muskie that traveled from Lake St. Clair all the way to Buffalo, New York. So that was pretty cool because for the longest time, they didn't think muskie traveled very far. So that was kind of when we started to learn that they might have a bigger range and a bigger potential for some genetic issues than we ever suspected. So that was a fun stalking change that came out of that. And then yellow perch, they have a combination of standard tags, so like jaw tags, things like that. It's what our standard, like passive tags. And then they have predation tags. So these tags are like the telemetry tags, but when they're eaten, I think it's like the stomach acid of the fish, or it won't reach the birds because they get out of range of the computer, but it will like release a special signal in the tag. And so it'll ping on a receiver, and we'll know based on the type of ping it's giving that it's been eaten by a fish. So they did that with yellow perch to better understand their movement rates, habitat use, and obviously their predation rates. So They got a lot going on there.
Yeah, no kidding. I had no idea about the predation data. So when we think about data, I'm sure you guys are immersed in Excel charts and graphs and all types of things. But as I understand it, our growth rates, say for walleye in the Saginaw Bay region, are pretty similar to that of, say, Lake Erie.
Mm-hmm.
But tagging isn't the only place that we get data from, right? I've many times been coming up to, say, the Patterson launch or different launch, Linwood Beach Marina, and I'll see a creel study going on. So can you help us understand a little bit more about how fish growth rates are collected and assessed using different types of approaches?
Okay, yeah. So for walleye, for example, since we have our ginormous data set for walleye in Saginaw Bay, we use our telemetry tag data that we just started to get this past 2 years. We have our jaw tag data. We have our own survey data that we go out with in our research boats and we collect. And then we have our fishery dependent data. And so that's the Krill Clerk data. They're going out there measuring walleye, seeing the number of people that are catching walleye, how long they spend fishing for them, where they caught them at, how many they caught that day, things like that. And that really helps us assess the catchability of the walleye and their harvest rates so that we can consider their mortality when we're making decisions about regulation changes. And then it's really with Dave Fielder, Dr. Dave Fielder's data, and Andrew Briggs and Jan Michael out in Mount Clemens when they go out with the channel cat and the tanner, which people will see often out in Saginaw Bay. They are getting fin clips and stuff, so they're assessing the growth associated with the age versus when we get just our krill data, a lot of times it's just how big the fish are. And then when we do our jaw tagging, we also have the aging. So all that stuff just gets averaged together because there's a different level of catchability. Obviously, when we're doing our stuff out in Tittabawassee, I mean, we're catching 3,000 fish, and we do that in sometimes a week because they're all right there, and we shock them. We got 3 shock boats out, and, it's not quite as difficult whenever you're hook and lining a fish. And so they're all concentrated, but they're all in the same river system, so there's less potential for unique diversity, I guess you could say, in those fish versus when the channel cat and the tanner go out in Saginaw Bay, they're setting their nets and doing their bottom trawls all over the place. So they get a wider range. They're getting fish that are moving out into the main basin. They're getting fish that never moved into the Tittabawassee potentially. And so, and then obviously with our krill data, a lot of those guys, they're going out there to get walleye. So they're going to the spots where they know walleye are going to be. They're in the slots, doing things like that, kind of following them around. So that's not giving us, on its own, a look at the entire bay. So that's why we have all the different ways that we collect that data.
Nice. And then you kind of merge it all together to get kind of a overall average. Mm-hmm. And certainly, like we had talked some time ago, the younger fish grow at a different rate than a mature fish, right? Mm-hmm. So you're trying to age it, look at maybe the age versus growth rate as well.
Right.
Okay. All right. When we talk about tagging, does tagging have any influence on stocking programs then?
Yes, they certainly can. So I'll do a brag on my brown trout project that I have ongoing. So in the Rifle River, like I mentioned earlier, we've been stocking brown trout there since like the 70s or something, forever. It's seen a lot of different strains of brown trout. We've had Seafor Ellen, Gilcrest Creek, Wild Rose. Now we have Sturgeon River. And each one of those strains have responded differently to a natural environment versus the hatchery environment. So Wild Rose and Sturgeon River are 2 strains we have now. Wild Rose is a domesticated hatchery strain. Sturgeon River still has a lot of wild components to it. And it seemed like when we started using Sturgeon River, we also started to get some lake run brown trout out in Saginaw Bay. And I don't know how familiar y'all are with this, but up until 2012, we used to stock brown trout right into Saginaw Bay. We were at the port. Tawas was a really popular spot where they were stocking those brown trout, but we were getting like less than 2% return to the fishery. It wasn't cost effective to do it. They didn't seem to be surviving. So DNR cut that stocking. And then that was kind of the end of it until about 2021 when I came on, is when it really seemed to get a lot more hype. That's like, where are all these brown trout coming from out in Saginaw Bay? They couldn't survive here 10 years ago. Like, what's going on? And I said, well, say less, because I've got some telemetry tags and a group of supportive scientists that let me take some of those bad boys from the walleye project and put them in brown trout. So I went out in the spring when it's easiest to catch brown trout out in Saginaw Bay. I was out in Tawas and caught 7 trout. Going out again this year. They're not quite as easy to catch as brown trout, so might take me a little bit longer, but hopefully going to get about 20 fish tagged. And with that information, I will be able to see what river they're coming from. What I didn't mention before is that when this was first brought up to me, I did do some genetic testing on samples that anglers gave me, and it was Sturgeon River strain and Gilcrest Creek. We don't stock Gilcrest Creek anymore, but we used to stock it in the Rifle. And then we now stock Sturgeon River in the Rifle. So the thought was these are likely Rifle River fish. Or they're wild fish that so happen to just spawn with those genetic strains because we have been stocking the Rifle for so long. So I did the telemetry project to see where these fish are coming from. Now I'm clipping stocked fish so I can see if any of those stocked fish are making it out into the bay. So together with both of that, I can say potentially, this is all potential. I don't want anybody to freak out about me going in there and changing any of the stocking efforts that we're doing. But there is a potential there that I could change the stocking regime to benefit not only the river fishery, but also this potentially large bay fishery as well that now we have a chance to utilize. That could mean that I shift some of the stocking locations further south. I reduce the number of stocking locations. Maybe I double up on the number of fish there. But without that telemetry data telling me what river these fish are even utilizing, then I don't really know where to target my efforts, because we also stock brown trout in the East Branch Au Gray, but that's a different strain. We stock wild rose there. We just switched to Sturgeon River, I'll say. So who knows? So maybe there will be a lake run population that's established in both of those rivers. So that's why we have the clipping and the stocking, or the clipping and the tagging coupled together to see where they're coming from. Are they wild or are they stocked? And how can I take advantage of this new fishery? Because something else with brown trout is they do outcompete brook trout. So the Rifle River has a lot of brook trout streams up in the headwaters. So could we have the best of both worlds if I shift that stocking a little bit? But I'm not going to do that because we've got a really good thing going right now. So I'm not going to mess with it until I get data that makes me feel good that I'm not going to lose the fishery that we have in the river, because it is a really great fishery the way that it sits. But we have an opportunity to increase diversity in the bay. Why not go after it? So.
And we think that there's enough food source to keep everybody happy.
Mm-hmm. That's a part of it, right? So looking at the forage data that comes in, Saginaw Bay itself seems to be doing just fine with its forage base. I have not seen the telemetry data yet for this year for our main basin. I don't think that my brown trout are moving out into the main basin, so I don't think I really have to worry too much about their forage base out there. But we'll see, because that'll be when forage comes into a bit more question.
Okay. So as we get kind of wrapping up this tagging program, have to get you back again, and we'll talk more in depth on stocking.
Oh, yeah.
But wrapping this tagging piece up, so how do you report a tagged fish? For me, I just go online, do it. It's fairly straightforward. Are there any other approaches, or is that the only way that people can get that done?
So it's definitely our preferred way to go to michigan.gov/taggedfish. You can also just Google Michigan tagged fish, and you come to your reporting form and you put in your location. It doesn't have to be exact. Get us as close as you're comfortable with getting us. I know that people can be very secretive about where they're catching their fish, but we really need that data so we know what's going on. But how big your fish was and where you caught it are the big things, and then obviously the tag number. You can also email a biologist if you're not sure on how to do the report online, or you can call us. You can always call any of our customer service centers. You can call biologists directly. We all still have those paper forms that we can fill out for you over the phone if you're not tech savvy, or you can come right into one of the customer service centers and report it that way as well. The big thing is that we do love pictures. They're not necessary, but they're really helpful to have. If it is a tag that's worth money, so if it's a jaw tag with an R on it, you do have to submit a picture of that tag. You have to have proof that you actually have it. And then if it's a telemetry tag, for you to get your $100 for a telemetry tag, you do have to return that tag. So just to clarify that, because I know some confusion we get to, you do not have to give us your jaw tag. You actually, if you catch a fish that has a jaw tag on it, you don't even have to harvest it if you don't want to. You can read the tag off and then put it back in the water. And you don't have to give us your reward tag. I know some people hang on to it because they don't want us to take it back. We are not going to take it back. We do not reuse those tags. We will reuse the telemetry tags because they are very expensive. So that's why we offer an award for each one of those tags. But to get those you do have to give back to us.
Okay. So anything else you'd like to add, maybe things we haven't covered with respect to marking or tagging fish before we wrap up today?
I guess I'll give a a little special shout out to my counterpart, Jason Gosto. He's the other biologist for Southern Lake Huron. He is the one that all of the tagging reports go through. So he sees a ton. We actually just had a glitch in the computer system where he wasn't getting the automatic updates when they were sent in. And so he was 3 days behind. And I think it took him like a week to catch up on just being 3 days behind on those reports. So I'll just ask that everybody extend us some grace. And
so that's great information, and that you and Jason collaborate. But you've got to have an extended team, and one of the things that it's good for the fishermen and is accessibility. So how do they get a hold of you? How do they reach out to your team? And can you tell us a little bit about that, please?
Yeah. So to get a hold of me directly, they can email me at SimmonsA14@michigan.gov. So it's my last name, first initial, 14@michigan.gov. They can reach out to my work cell phone, which I'm not afraid to put out there. It's 989-220-8688. I love it when people call or text me. And if you go onto our website, you can get all of the biologist contact information right there. It's all public information. So the way that our unit is set up, we have our basin coordinator. So that's Doug Schultz. He oversees all of Lake Huron. So we have Northern Lake Huron and Southern Lake Huron. I'm in Southern Lake Huron, covering the Saginaw River up and around to Tawas Bay. And then Jason, my counterpart, also in Southern Lake Huron, he covers Saginaw River down and around like Flint, Cache, Shiawassee, all of that. And he's going up and around the ports of the Thumb. So there's just us two. We have Jeff Jolly. He is our unit supervisor, so he's in between us and Doug. And then we have Chris, who's our tech supervisor, and he supervises 2 technicians, Vince and Ryan, and that's it. So there's, 5 of us, 6 of us if you include our supervisor in Southern Lake Huron, and we cover the largest watershed in Michigan, just us. So it's a lot of work for a little bit of staff, but we do the best we can, and we try to get out as much as we can. And that's why I love when people are willing to call me and talk to me about their fishing experiences and stuff they're seeing out there, because we can't be in everywhere all at once, but we do our best.
Absolutely. I know I've learned a few things today, and I've really enjoyed the time you spent with me. Again, I'd really like to have you back and talk to us about stocking programs. But April, thanks again for your time, and look forward to working with you again.
Yeah, this was fun. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure.